told you, I've been in the compliance department for about 1 year now. There's been a lot of turnover in the department. We've completely replaced Kristen and Cindy are gone. And this last year has been about replacing them and getting up to staff. That's not an easy thing to do. I mean, they were very solid and very good at what they did, and so it's going to be a while before we can say that we've replaced them. But one important thing that the league has done is it's decided to go with 3 people in the compliance department instead of 2, and that just helps us in so many ways. It's impossible to articulate all of them. Number one, it helps us with the duties that we regularly have. We could have somebody in the field visiting a credit union every single day. We have to have somebody in the office taking phones and emails every single day. And we need, I mean, I know all of you are aware of this, we need to have somebody looking at what's coming next and offering guidance every single day. And so in a lot of ways, 3 is a very significant magic number, if you will. I think it's a very important number. Took us a while to find people who were interested in compliance. I don't know if you can imagine that, but I come from a compliance background in that I was, I've been an attorney since 1997. Most of my practice I've been representing in an outside law firm representing the consumer banking and consumer lending industry on regulatory issues, compliance issues, defending lawsuits that they get involved in. And so I'm just naturally nerdy. So I just kind of like this stuff. It's not interesting. But the challenge of finding other people who have some sort of energy for that subject matter is difficult to do. And I'm pleased to say that we're fully staffed now. This last year has been about getting up to staff. We've added Robert Sparrow. Robert has about 15 years in consumer banking, 6 years in credit unions. He's at #1 for some time, and came to the league already with significant knowledge about compliance and already with the CUCE certification that you can get through CUNA. And he is just a really solid find. One of the only reasons we can get him and keep him is that he was looking to do something a little different. He was a branch manager of a national bank before he came to us, and he really wanted to get back into credit unions. We're happy to have him. We're fortunate to have him. He's very good at the addition. And we've added Clark Jefferson, who had, I guess, about 6 or 7 years of experience in consumer banking. Whereas Robert is mainly on the deposit side. Clark knows the lending and collection and all that area, and he's got a lot of experience with consumer financial literacy and a lot of other boring topics that he's just really interested in. Robert started in April, Clark started in May. The rest of this year is going to be about giving them the training they need to get up to speed, and hopefully the beginning of next year onward, hopefully we'll be back up to speed and doing what you need us to do. How many people here are involved on a daily basis in compliance related issues? All right. I knew that was going to be the case. I've been to about 4 chapter meetings so far, and the first couple of them I went there all ready to talk about the nuts and bolts of compliance, and it didn't work out so well. So tonight, I mean, I'll stick around afterward. You can ask me about compliance issues or about the compliance department. But tonight, what I was going to talk about is just the philosophy to have as a credit union to have a good compliance program. Compliance is something that you have to do. I'm not going to talk about nuts and bolts. I'm just going to talk about what you need to know to have the right philosophy to survive. And I tried to do it so that put it together so that anybody who's not interested in compliance can just kind of close your eyes and imagine that they're talking about parenting or any other sort of general life thing that you have to manage, dealing with family at holidays. And so I'll jump right in. As I was telling Dan, I was basically preparing these remarks today, and they really kind of have no beginning and no end, and I think that's a good thing because it may be that Dan has to yank me off the stage at some point, and I don't think you'll be able to tell whether I'm finished or not. So the first point, as we jump into what you need to know to deal with compliance. And one of the first points that I think everybody needs to know is that there is not always a perfect solution to issues or problems that you come up with, and there's not always even a right solution to it. That's kind of hard for us to swallow. Regulatory compliance, statutes and regulations that affect our lives and our operations. We want to know, I think about Eastern cultures versus Western cultures, and I don't know if you've ever studied Eastern philosophies or religions, but they're really into uncertainty. They deal with uncertainty a lot better than Western philosophies and Western cultures deal with uncertainty. They actually embrace it, or they try to. And we expect to see a well-beaten path. We want to have a right answer to questions that are presented to us. We want time-tested solutions to problems. We don't want uncertainty. We don't want to, think about a problem and at the end of the day have to admit there may be no answer to this. But what you have to do in compliance, Deborah probably realizes this more than any, and the other compliance people who are here, but what you have to do is you have to accept that notwithstanding what examiners tell you, or regulators or auditors, the path isn't always clear on compliance issues. Sometimes it is, but sometimes the path isn't clear, and sometimes there's no path at all. If you're, truly going into an area that hasn't been tackled before, and this is just because when people draft our laws and our regulations, they do their best, but they can't always anticipate how it's going to work in every situation. And so sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes it's downright impossible to comply. In terms of impossible to comply, I remember one of the things that I did at the law firm that I worked at that I didn't like so much is I represented a lot of debt collectors. And I defended them when people sued them, and I defended them when regulators went after them. And I think most of the ones I represented, it's a distasteful career for most of us. We, outside debt collectors whose only job is to collect debts that belong to other people. But I remember that there's a part of the FDCPA, the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act. Don't worry about this because it doesn't apply to credit unions for the most part, because it only applies to people who are collecting debts that belong to other people. Just that's their careers, is debt collection. But there was this issue, this compliance issue, where when they call somebody's phone and reach an answering machine or a person, they have to meaningfully disclose who they are, and they have to get this little mini Miranda that says, we're debt collectors, you don't have to tell us anything, blah 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 blah. So they're supposed to, when they reach somebody's household or voicemail, they're supposed to put this on voicemail. At the same time, they're supposed to not disclose that they're debt collectors to anybody other than the person who owes the debt. And so lots of households, roommate situations or whatnot, debt collectors are put in the position of, I say who I am on the answering machine, and the debtor, the consumer who owes the debt, sues me because I disclosed to the roommate, something about it, about the debt. Now the roommate knows that there's a debt. Or I don't say who I am, and then I get sued for not disclosing who I am. And adding to this is that, if debt collectors ringing the phone line and not telling who they are and not leaving a message can get in trouble for harassment. And so if they call and they don't leave a message, they can get sued for harassment. And so that is sort of like a compliance puzzle that cannot be solved. And that is an example of how sometimes it's impossible to comply. And other times it's a little better than that. It's just not clear how how you can comply with the regulatory requirements. And I could go into some details about those, but I won't. I'll move on. I think hopefully you get what I'm talking about. That sometimes there's no right answer from the quandary that debt collectors are put in, because there are similar quandaries that credit unions deal with every day. And so, again, whether you're talking about parenting, whether you're talking about compliance and credit unions, remember that there's not always a perfect solution or even a right solution. And so the next point is, given the first point, the next point is, whether it's parenting or compliance, is to expect imperfection in what goes on in your compliance and solutions that you try to come up with. I mean, there are sometimes, like I said, it's impossible to comply. Sometimes the right solution isn't clear, it's not spelled out, you just pick the wrong solution. Sometimes there are just too many changes going on. We all know about that, people who are paying attention. Too many changes going on, and you just can't keep up with what goes on. And sometimes you have great policies, that would lead you towards compliance, but somebody messes up and doesn't get it right, and there you are, non-compliant. And I've just noticed with a lot of compliance people who I work with, and a lot of credit union people who, whether volunteers or staff, who want to comply with their little piece of the credit union world. I noticed that I run into a lot of perfectionists, and that's usually a good thing. It's usually a very good thing to have perfectionists concerned about your compliance. But I want to get to, when I say expect imperfection in your compliance and in your solutions, I want to get across the point that, not having 100% compliance, not succeeding 100% does not mean that you were a failure. As long as you have the aim to work hard at complying and learn from the mistakes that happen, you should expect non-compliance, and you should not consider the credit union or yourself or whatever you're doing to be a failure. I've noticed that very small credit unions have an easier time with this than others, because I've run into some small credit unions where they've reached the point where all they can do is laugh about it. The changes that occur so quickly, all they can do is just laugh and say, I was juggling all this, I dropped the balls a long time ago, and so I'm not going to take it too personally that I can't stay on top of it. But the larger credit unions get, and I don't mean to the point of being large, but I think there's a crucial chunk right there in the middle where people can just absolutely drive themselves crazy, because you feel like you're this close. I mean, just this close from having, a first-rate compliance program and being on top of most of everything, but somehow it always seems to evade you. You get an examination report that always has something on there that displeases you or isn't perfect, and examiners relish the opportunity to find stuff and write it down. That's what they're not mean people. They're just trying to do a good job, and they've been trained to identify this stuff, and so they get really excited. And so expect imperfection, whether it's parenting or compliance, in the things that you try and the things that you do, and realize that not having perfect compliance does not mean that you're a failure. Okay, so given that perfect compliance and perfect solutions are unlikely, I had some tips for people to keep in mind as they make decisions. And the first one is to prioritize. focus on issues with the biggest potential impact to the credit union in terms of for people thinking about parenting, pick your battles, prioritize, focus on the most important things. I've said before that there are certain non-compliance issues where you're not doing what you're supposed to do that are effectively like a non-compliance bus, just cruising down the street. And then there are other issues that, in effect, are like non-compliance falling satellites that just fall out of the sky. And if you think about if you're going to get in trouble with compliance and have your name on an examination report or written up or something, what do you want to? What would you prefer? It's sort of an obituary of sorts, a compliance obituary or post-mortem. Would you prefer that the report say, poor Nathan, he was hit by the non-compliance bus. I don't know why he didn't see it coming. He should have stepped out of it. Or would you rather have something that says, he stayed away from the compliance bus. He crossed that street, and then he was just hit by this falling satellite. Nothing he could do. And so, it goes without saying for most people, if you really think about it, it makes sense. Prioritize. Focus first on coming into compliance on issues with the biggest potential impact to your credit union. And to me, those are issues that are the easiest category of them is issues that are going to be involved in every member relationship or every transaction that you have, like your agreements and cardholder agreements and disclosures and periodic statements. And that's just an example, just a starting point of what the biggest issues are. Make sure you resolve those first so you don't get hit by the non-compliance bus, and then save the potential falling satellites to deal with later. Okay, and another point, given that perfection is unlikely, keep in mind that the bottom line is always relevant to how you spend your time in compliance. And be pragmatic about how you resolve things based on what the bottom line is. I've had situations before where people call me and we'll be talking for an hour about some issue. And by the way, anybody at any credit union, volunteer, staff, whoever, you're welcome to call the compliance department. If it fits within the protocol at your credit union, you're welcome to call me. I'll talk to anybody. I crave people who want to talk about this stuff. Because my wife doesn't, my son doesn't. But I'll be talking to people, to somebody for an hour about deceased member account. So-and-so's here, wants you to cut a check to them, but refuses to provide a death certificate or, anything like that. And then, we go over it for an hour, and then I'll call back an hour later, and we'll talk about it for half an hour. And suddenly it'll occur to me, how much money is in the account? $10. And I want people to call about stuff like that because compliance is compliance, and if that's the first time that issue is raised, is it okay to give out money under these circumstances? That's the situation when it comes up, and you need to call us and you need to talk about the rule. But don't agonize over $10. $10 is not $10,000. And if you can afford, and sometimes I've even said, you give them the money right now, and if anything comes of it, I'll write you a check for it. And if you can say that, if your management can say that about certain things, don't spend forever in a day worrying about it. Because again, when you're worried about the $10 account that you're fairly sure you should be giving to this person, then you're not worrying about the bigger picture, the priorities that we were talking about. So again, moving on to the next point, given that perfection is unlikely, one of the things that lawyers do good compliance people do is that they accept that there's this uncertainty that we talked about earlier. And one thing that you should always try to do, and this is room for creativity and excitement and fun in an otherwise very rigid world, try to create policies and procedures that push in the direction of things that you know and you're confident about, and away from directions where you're uncertain. I mean, a good percentage of the calls we get deal with, my member just died. You know, what are we going to do? And it's a huge issue. It's a huge issue that, you know, we are going to do releases on that more comprehensively address what do you do with deceased member accounts. I want to come up with the mother of all documents, guidance documents that shows how you do something in every instance when your member dies. But, I mean, some people may be right on top of that, but we get a lot of calls on it, and there are a lot of areas of uncertainty, and there are some bona fide areas where there's not a real good answer. And so a lot of people have lacked certainty about this. And this is just as an example of pushing in the direction of things you know. It would be smart if your credit union doesn't like the manpower that's involved in resolving those issues to aggressively try to get members to designate a POD beneficiary. And it may be something that everybody's already doing, but the reason I say that pushes in the area of certainty, I mean, what do you do when a member dies and there's a POD designee on there? What do you do? Anybody know?
Pay the money.
Yeah, you pay the money to the POD beneficiary. You don't have to work out, you know, whether there's going to be an administrator or executor of the estate, whether there's a will, you know, whether people are going to sign a small estates affidavit to let you get the money out. I ran into, in terms of you know, my compliance adventures since joining the league, I ran into one credit union that, you know, they don't force their members to do PODs, but they address the question seriously when they're signing up. And that credit union almost never calls me with deceased member issues. And, you know, maybe I wish they would call me, but they're probably not saying that. They're probably quite happy that they've sort of maneuvered a compliance solution that saves them time because they're more certain of what to do when there's a POD on the account than if there's not. Okay. Moving on, because I know everybody wants to keep moving through this. This one, again, given that perfection is highly unlikely, and given all that we've talked about, one thing that I wanted to mention is this rule is stated over and over. People say it different ways, but don't let the desire for a perfect solution prevent you from doing something that's an incremental improvement, even if it's not perfect. I think people say it most frequently, don't let the good. And how many people are familiar with the requirement, the OFAC requirement of checking the SDN list? Do people know about that? I mean, in general? Okay, well, one thing, I'm just using this as an example. You know, basically, OFAC maintains this list. It's a government agency within the Treasury Department, and they maintain a list of people that no American citizens are allowed to do business with. None of them. Nobody. You know, me, you, the credit union, the bank. Nobody's allowed to do business. And the regulation is written in such a way it's perfectly simple. If you ever are involved in any transaction that involves anybody on this list, you've just violated the law. Plain and simple. And that means in the credit union world, that touches basically touches every party to every transaction. Almost all credit unions at this point have it down where they check the list when somebody comes in to open the account, and they can check it off and say, we check, the person is not on the list, we can open the account. And almost every credit union checks their membership list regularly. But things break down after that because it's just overwhelming the thought of checking every single party to every transaction. you're supposed to check the POD designates, you're supposed to check the payees on loan checks and on other checks, and sell monetary instruments. It's very burdensome, and it's difficult to find an affordable solution that will just do it all automatically. And so a lot of credit unions kind of fold at that point and say, well, we're doing what we can until that perfect solution comes along. Not much else we can do. And the problem is the examiners are really excited about it, so they come in and they identify a whole category of things that you've got to check, that they're going to insist that you check, like loan proceed checks. They're going to say, you got to check to see if this person is on the list before you disperse the check to the auto dealership or to the bank to repay a loan. And recently somebody reported to me that, our examiner said you got to check the loan proceeds checks, the payee, and you got to check all of them. And he said, but this one I'm refinancing, and I paid the check is payable to SunTrust Bank. Oh yeah, we want you to check even if it's SunTrust Bank. So the examiners can get really kind of excited about this, especially the young examiners. And I can say that because I hear that people sometimes say I look young. I'm older than I look. Been around for a while. And so I can say the younger examiners are usually the ones that impose these requirements. But the key is, most credit unions shy away from coming up with a partial solution to that problem of checking everything. And some of the best solutions I've seen as I do BSA audits are credit unions that have sat down and they've created a chart with all the possible transactions and parties on it, and they've figured out what are we already testing and what are we not. And then with the what are we not, they say, well, where is the risk, the main risk that we're going to run into somebody on this list? And so, pardon me, I'm sorry. Some of them have come up with these really neat, elegant solutions where they can't afford to check everything, but for loan proceeds checks, they get ahead of the examiner and they write down something that say, it's very unlikely that this auto dealership that I've been dealing with for 20 years is on a terrorist watch list. Very unlikely. It's very unlikely that SunTrust Bank is on there. And so they come up with a policy that is an incremental improvement that says, if it's somebody we haven't been doing business with for years, not listed on a stock exchange, not an immediately recognizable company, we're going to check them. We're going to do a manual search on the OFAC listing, write it up in the report, and the examiner sees it and thinks, well, gosh, this is well thought out, and hopefully the examiner doesn't try to be heavy-handed because they see that you've thought through it, and while you haven't come up with a perfect solution, you've come up with one that makes a lot of sense, and it makes an incremental improvement over the way it was before. That's about as nerdy as we're going to get tonight in terms of the detail, and we're not going to go very much farther. Okay, so moving on, if we've got imperfect compliance, I want to make another couple points. The good news is that there are not always consequences to not comply. Sometimes things are okay even if you mess up. And basically, I've seen a lot of regulatory fights. I've seen a lot of fights between financial institutions, fights with consumers and financial institutions. It's been my observation that if you try hard to comply and you're fair and honest with people and you have reasons for the things that you do that are fair and honest reasons and that are articulable and you write it down, most of the time there's not going to be a huge, many times if you drop the ball somewhere, there's not going to be a huge consequence. The bad news is, to go along with that point, huge consequences are possible for non-compliance. And so you do have to take it very, very seriously. But I make the point I was saying earlier, don't feel like a failure just because you comply, or just because you don't comply 100% of the time or you have issues. It's sort of a related point, but don't panic. Don't get into the sky is falling mode just because there's been some non-compliance. Be productive about it, and realize that many times as long as you do those things, try hard, be fair and honest with people, and have reasons for what you do, and you're gonna, at the end of the day, be okay. Some final points. I was gonna tell you an exciting story about huge consequences for failing to comply, but I'm gonna cut that out because it's actually nerdier than the OFAC stuff, and we need to move on. But okay, just some rules of thumb, because it can have huge consequences sometimes. The things that we gotta recommend is invest in compliance at your credit union. Make sure you have the personnel. Make sure you train the personnel. Make sure they have research resources and other tools. By other tools, I mean things like documents that do the job of compliance for you, as long as you fill them out right. I had on here bribes, but these are easy things to see. They were easy things for me to learn in the law firm environment, because I've always been cheap by nature. So if a legal research resource or software had a $1,000 price tag, I would think, well, there's no way I can get by without that. The benefit of an investment like that is really easy to see in private law practice, because you start thinking, okay, I can either, like, if I'm functioning efficiently, I can, using resources where they've already gathered everything together, I can charge $250 an hour to somebody. And so, by not buying this book, I'm going to have to do the legwork, and I can't justify charging $250 an hour for inefficient research. And so it's easy to see in a law firm that making an investment in resources like that pays for itself very quickly. 4 hours of work, where you're utilizing that tool instead of something else. In essence, to simplify things, pays for itself. But I really believe, and I may be the only person in the room, that investing in compliance at your credit union has a similar cost-benefit analysis. You could look at it as, okay, if I get the tools in the hands of my people that keep me from paying an outside attorney to do all this stuff, you could look at it that way, and it may, the cost-benefit analysis may work out. But in other intangible areas, like just knowing what to do instead of being afraid that maybe what you're doing is the wrong thing. I think if you consider every single aspect that these additional investments bring to you, it really adds up. And it's not always, when I say invest in compliance, it's not always about spending. There are a lot of free resources. I say free, they're available to you by virtue of your credit union's membership in CUNA and the league. And I sent recently, we're reviving our listserv, and I recently sent a list of some of those compliance resources. But even without spending money, if you merely make use of the fantastic resources that are on CUNA's website, the ones that we're going to have for you on the league website, and having somebody spend time learning those, you're saving money in the long run. And let's see. Okay. I'll try to end up. I know I keep saying that. This is such exciting stuff. This is an important point, so I want to make it. Another thing that you need to know is be clear about who is responsible for compliance. And this is both internally and as you're working with outside vendors. Human beings have built into us a safety in numbers type thing that we whether we're aware of it on the conscious level or whether it's unconscious with us or subconscious, we believe that there's more safety in numbers. And while that may be true in some aspects of life, it can actually have the reverse effect in compliance situations. If you're implementing a new project or doing something new, and you have a bunch of people, all of them seemingly competent and intelligent and informed, who are managing the project, you can have a diffusion of responsibility where everybody sort of assumes, well, if something was wrong with this on the compliance side, somebody would have said something, I'm pretty sure. And And so you can end up in a real mess if you don't have a very specific, if you're not very clear in everything you do, both in the big picture and on individual projects. You need to have a person who's responsible for, or a group or committee responsible for analyzing, identifying, and resolving compliance resources. And you probably still need to have like a formal compliance review where you actually think about it and write it down on paper. And one example that comes up is I was counsel on a case one time that involved a mortgage lender with offices in Chicago and Atlanta, an ad company that was in New York, a fulfillment company, meaning somebody who got the paper and envelopes and printed everything and mailed everything that was in Florida, and a lead generator, for people, prospective marketing people, who was really only God knows where the lead generator was, because it was some sort of virtual thing that only existed in the cloud. But I was involved in a case like this where mailers, with all those different people, they were sending mailers to Arizona advertising loan products, saying non-compliant things, using personal info on the weak list that they shouldn't have had to begin with, and realized after the fact that nobody was saving any records of what was being mailed to whom. And that was the best example of this, where safety numbers can get you in trouble, because everybody either assumed that somebody else was responsible for every piece of compliance, or outright blamed another person. It was like, he approved it, no, she approved it, they approved it. So it was a huge mess. It was a huge governmental investigation in Arizona, and it lasted forever, and it cost a lot of money, and it was largely caused by the safety number approach. And you have to be particularly careful with these outside vendors, because they come in and sell you their expertise, and they say, we've been doing this for years. Well, sometimes they've been doing it wrong for years. And so you just need to be clear about who is in charge and make sure that there's a formal compliance review. The last two things, don't get in a hurry. There are very few emergencies. Don't let your member services hat get you in a hurry in a situation where you might make a mistake, where you need time. The last point, ask for help. Ask for second opinions all the time.